Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Sadibet. Nu Mishnah. Ochel poel kishot afilu bedinar, kotevet va'afilu bedinar. Rabbi Elazar Chisma Omer, lo yochal poel yater al secharo. חכמים מתירים, אבל מלמדים את האדם שלא יהיה רעבתן, ויסותם את הפתח בפניו. Tanakama says that a worker, while he is working in someone's field, is allowed to eat. If he's working on cucumbers, he can eat the cucumbers, even if he eats a lot, amount worth that's worth a dinar. Or if it's dates and he eats dates, even if the date is a very nice, expensive date, worth a dinar, that's it. Since he's allowed to eat, he can eat as much as he wants, as expensive as it is. However, Rabbi Elazar Chisma disagrees and says there's a maximum. The worker cannot eat more than his wages. If he's getting paid $100 for the day, he cannot go and eat $110 worth of produce. However, Chachamim permit. Nevertheless, we tell the worker not to eat too much, not to be a glutton, because then he will be closing a possibility of employment in the future. They're going to shut the door in his face. They're going to say, oh, that guy, remember last time he came and worked on the field? He ate half of everything that he took. He ate more than his worth. Forget it. Better not to have him at all. You actually make money by not hiring him. And so you would tell people, even though technically, from the letter of the law, they have a right to eat as much as they want, but for their own good, if they ever want to be hired again, it's a good idea for them not to be too gluttonous. Okay, Gemara asks, Chachamim, Hainu Tanakama. Chachamim look like it's the same as Tanakama. Tanakama says they can eat whatever they want, even a lot of a big amount like a dinar. And Chachamim also say it's permitted for them to eat even more than their wages. So what's the difference between Tanakama and Chachamim? From a Peshat point of view of the Mishnah, it could be that they are the same. That presents Tanakama as the main halacha, and then it elaborates on the Rabbi Elazar's minority opinion, and then Chachamim who disagree, although we do limit it somewhat, so it's kind of elaborating on the halacha. But in any case, the Gemara is reading it as two separate opinions, so what's the difference between them? And answer number one is Ika benahu hava melamedin letanakama leta melamedin rabanan it le melamedin. It could be this line that we tell them not to eat too much as good advice. According to Tanakama, we don't tell them anything. Listen, you have a right to eat whatever you want, so go ahead, eat whatever you want. That's the Torah law. There's no limitations at all. Whereas, according to Chachamim, at the end, they say it's permitted, but midrabanan, we tell them, listen, for your own good, don't eat too much. That's the difference between them. A second answer. Ika benahu derav aseh, de'amar Rav aseh, afilu lo secharo ela libsor, eshkol ehad ochelo. Ve'amar Rav aseh, afilu lo basar ela eshkol ehad ochelo. So maybe the difference between Tanakam and Chachamim is the opinion of Rav aseh, who says that, let's say the boss hired this guy to harvest one cluster. Not a lot of work. It only takes a few minutes. Go and harvest this one cluster. The worker can eat the whole thing, which means in the end, the boss will not have gotten anything out of the deal, but that's the law. You're allowed to eat what you're working on, and there's only one cluster. He eats the whole thing. It is permitted. That's what they're arguing about, and so it seemed that Tanakama is the more lenient one. So he probably is the one that agrees with Rav Aseh and says even if you eat a dinar, even if you eat more than your worth, for the payment, it's permitted. And then Chachamim would say, listen, don't be gluttonous, eat everything, eat the whole one cluster that you're there to consume. Then the boss is going to be, remember I hired this guy, I just gave him a little job, and he ate the entire thing. I got nothing out of it. And so Chachamim would say, disagree with Rav Aseh. Okay, Rav Aseh said two similar laws. The first one is when he's hired only to eat one cluster, he's hired to harvest one cluster, and he's allowed to eat it. And the second one is talking about where he's hired to work the whole day, to harvest a lot. But so far, he only harvested one cluster. He can eat it. He doesn't have to put a whole bunch in the basket for the boss, and then he could eat. Even the very first one that he takes, he is allowed to eat. So these two laws are complementary. And now we ask, why do you need both? Couldn't we learn one from the other? וסריחה דישמינן החכמייתא משום דלאיגה למיטב לכליו של בעל הבית. אבל היכא דאיגה למיטב לכליו של בעל הבית, אמלטה ברשע והדר לחול. If we learned only the first statement of Rav Aseh, then I might have thought that only in that case can the worker eat, because there is nothing else to put into the owner's basket. And so if he puts that in the basket, then the worker has nothing else to eat. But the worker is allowed to eat. So I might have thought that only in that case, because that's the only cluster that he's working on, so he can eat it. But if there's a lot more that he's going to be harvesting and putting into the vessel of the owner, then he should put the clusters for the owner first, and only then eat. So I might have thought that the leniency is when there's only one cluster. Well, that's the only cluster he can eat, so he's allowed to. But if there's a lot of clusters, then he cannot eat until the owner at least gets some in his basket. So that's why I need the second clause to teach me not so. Even if there's a lot, he can eat the very first one. וישמינן בהא דאפשר לקיימה לבסוף, אבל הכא דלאו אפשר לקיימה לבסוף, אמלה סריחה. And if I only had the second statement of Rav Aseh, I might have thought only in that case is the worker allowed to eat the very first cluster, because there's more to come that he will put in the vessel for the owner. However, if there is only one cluster, and now if he eats it, then there's going to be nothing in the basket. The owner's going to get nothing out of it. I might have thought that the worker is not allowed to eat it in that case. So but that's not true. No matter what, whether there's only one cluster or there's many clusters, the worker is allowed to eat that very first one that he picks. Now, a third answer to explain the difference between Chachamim and Tanakama. Ika banaihu derav de'amarav masati Megillat Setarim be Rabbi Chaya v'chatuba. Isi ben Yehuda omer ki tabo b'cherem ra'echa bebi'at kol adam hakatu medaber ve'amarav lo shebak isi chaye lechol biriya. Something very interesting. So Tanakama and Chachamim are arguing on this statement of Rav. For Rav says, I found a hidden scroll in the house of Rabbi Chaya. Rabbi Chaya was Rav's uncle. Now, what are these hidden scrolls? At this point, Torah shebe'al peh was still be'al peh, even though Rabbi composed the Mishnah, and there is a machloket about this between the Geonim and Rambam and so on, Rishonim and Achronim also. It seems that the historical opinion is that everything was memorized, even though Rabbi compiled the Mishnah and set forth the fixed text, but it was memorized for the most part. It was memorized throughout the time of the Tanaim, throughout the time of the Amoraim. It wasn't until early in the period of the Geonim that they first started writing down Torah shebe'al peh, and even then, it was not in the big Babylonian yeshivot that they wrote it down. There, they actually boast in letters that we have. They write, our yeshiva is so fantastic, students don't even know what a book is, because they know everything by heart. The only time it was written down is when one Gaon traveled all the way out to Spain to some small village, and there was a Jewish community, and they didn't have anyone that knew it by heart. They said, we want to learn Talmud. So he went and he wrote down the whole thing from memory, so that they would have it. And that's how it started becoming written. So really, officially, it was not written. Nevertheless, even during the time of the early Amoraim, there were these hidden scrolls. Some students would write down private notes for themselves to arrange matters, to help them memorize or keep track of some laws. And these are, in fact, halachot. That's in this one. There were books of Agadah. So that's one area of Torah shebe'al peh that was written down. We have mention of books of Agadah. Okay, so but these were hidden away because they were not officially recognized. In other words, if you came to yeshiva with this written document of oral law, it would not prevail over the memorized version. If someone said, "Oh, I have a written version," it says, "No, that's not official. We follow the memorized version officially, and this is only for private notes." Okay, so he found one of these hidden. Well, there was hidden in his house, and Rav happened to find it. And it said in it a tradition from Isi ben Yehuda, who says, regarding our pasuk, if you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you can eat as many grapes as you want. What is that? Who is that referring to? It's referring to anybody, not only a worker. This whole time that we've been studying this halacha, we've been assuming that it's talking only about a worker can eat. But he says, which may very well be the peshat of this pasuk, that anyone who happens to be passing by and is traveling, he feels hungry. Oh, look at these nice grapes. It's open for everyone. It's my field, but I'm happy to share with anyone who wants to come by. Is permitted to do so. It could be that this was a hidden document, not only because it was oral law that cannot be written down. In this particular case, it's possible that it was hidden away because it's a peshat that's against the derash. And it's the peshat is against the halacha that the midrash says it's only for a worker. And so this was like hidden away interpretation, so that people, especially if there were still like Sadokim around, that were giving the literal reading, so that's why this was hidden away, so that people should not think that this is actually the halacha. Okay, in any case, he found this document, and Rav commented about this interpretation that it's not practical, because then you will not leave a livelihood for any farmer, for any entity. Because if I have a vineyard, and now everybody who passes by can come and take grapes and fill them themselves up as much as they want, all right, they can't take a doggy bag to take it home, but they can eat as much as they want, then I won't be able to have a vineyard. Everybody's going to come and take free food, and I won't have any livelihood. So this is just a practically impossible situation. Okay, so maybe this is the argument that they were arguing about, whether Rav's criticism of this statement is correct or not. And here again, we could assume that the Tanakh Kama is the more lenient one, and that says everybody can come and take, agrees with Isi ben Yehuda, and the Chachamim that say no, you should tell people not to be gluttonous and this to be practically minded, that he would be the one that would agree with Rav that says it's impossible and therefore don't do it. Okay, Amar Rav Asher, Amritah lishma'ata kamed Rav Kahana, Dilma beosin beseudatam dabdu ve'achlu. Rav Asher says, I repeated this statement of Rav, his criticism of Isi ben Yehuda's statement, and I repeated in front of Rav Kahana, and Rav Asher says, I suggested to Rav Kahana a solution to help defend Isi ben Yehuda. Maybe, we're not talking about anyone who comes and passes by and just takes as many grapes as he wants. That would be impossible to make a living in that case. But maybe it's talking about people that come for their meal, and they work a little and they eat. In other words, there are people that would come by. They wouldn't just take things for free. They would volunteer to work in the field for a half hour or an hour and eat while they're working. But they would basically break out even, more or less. They would pay their way. And so it could be that's talking about that. You can't just come and take grapes for nothing. But if you work a little in the field, then you pay your way and take those grapes. And so maybe that's what it's talking about, even if it's not an official worker that was hired for the whole day or a certain amount of time with official wages, even if it's these volunteers who come and eat while they're working, that would be practical to have a farm where you have people that pass by and everybody chips in a little and they eat a little, and that could be a nice system. Maybe that's what Isi ben Yehuda was assuming, that's what the peshat of the pasuk is talking about. So that's what Rav Asher presented. However, Rav Kahana said, no, that's not a good answer. Amar li afilu hachi ni chaleli nishlo gad agorev niktefe lefardese v'nadnitu kule alma v'achelule. Rav Kahana says, I would still agree with Rav, because even with these volunteer workers, the owner would prefer to actually pay and hire workers to pluck the orchard and do a proper job, rather than everybody coming in, doing a little work here, doing a little work there, taking everything they want. If you hire a worker for the whole day, okay, so he'll eat, how much can one person eat? Fine, he'll eat and he works the whole day. These people, they're going to come, work for an hour, but also eat a full lunch, and who knows if they're doing a proper job, if they're going in order. So no, a person would still not want that. You can't run a farm with random people coming in and working a little here, there, and eating, and so that he sustains Rav's opinion. All right, so now we understand the three possible differences between Tanakh Kama and Chachamim. We now ask a question that's going to take us all the way till the end of this daf and even into the beginning of the next daf. Ibaya lehu poel mishelohu ochel or mishel shamayim hu ochel? A philosophical question. When the Torah says that a worker is allowed to eat while he's working, is he eating from his own property or from the property of heaven? In other words, do we consider this a monetary obligation of the owner that this is like part of the wages? You get the regular wages, $100 for the day, and plus he also the lunch, eating whatever, the grapes and dates, whatever you're working on. So that's just part of the wages. Then it's coming to the worker. The worker can do whatever he wants with it. Or do we say, no, this is a gift from heaven? Hashem said that you get this, so it's like a special privilege that is granted to him from the Torah. Lemay nafkamina. Now, what would be the practical difference between these two possibilities? Tamar tenu liishti ubanai iamat mishelohu ochel yabinan lehu ele amat mishel shamayim ochel lidide zaki lerachamana liishto banav la zaki lehu rachamana mai. The difference would be if the worker says, listen, I'm not hungry, I don't want it. Instead, give it to my wife or my children. Let them eat the grapes that I am working on. So if you say that it's his own, it's part of his wages, then he should be able to give it to whoever he wants. He's entitled to this lunch. He's not in the mood for the lunch. Okay, give it to someone else. So, let's say there's lunch included in your job. There's a cafeteria and everybody can come, and like Google cafeteria and everybody can come. Let's say I'm not hungry today. All right, so since I'm entitled to lunch, so can I go bring my friend, bring my child, and have them eat? If it's just part of my wages, then I should be allowed to give it to anybody who I want. But if we say that this is a special gift granted from Shamayim, then this is a special gift made out only to the worker. Hashem said the worker is allowed to eat, but who said that it's a special gift granted to anybody else? Not so, not to his wife, not to his children. The Torah doesn't say that, and so therefore he would not have the right to gift it over to anybody else. All right, that's the question. We're going to have a whole long list of proofs, one way and the other. Tashema, ochel poel kishot afilu bedinar, kotebet vafilu bedinar. Amart mishelo ochel ogil bedanka achil bezuza. So we're going to learn a proof from the beginning of our Mishnah that a worker can eat cucumbers or dates, even a lot, even a dinar's worth. Now, if you say that that it's his own, it's his wages that's coming to him, so this doesn't make any sense. He's hired, let's say he's hired for a danka, which is 1/6 of a dinar, and then he's going to eat a whole dinar. It's not proportional. It makes no sense to be wages, because it's so out of proportion. It's way too much to be wages. So it must be that it's from heaven, right? Well, it doesn't make sense the other way either. You say, from heaven they gave him a gift. Yeah, but still, what kind of gift is that? He's only working for 1/6 of dinar is his salary, and then from heaven gives him this out of proportion gift. Rather, how can you explain it? Well, if it's a gift from heaven, so that's the way it is. Hashem said, you know what? You deserve a gift. You get a dinar, even though it's a large amount. So you could say the same thing here, that it's part of his wages, and yet the Torah mandated that the boss give him a dinar of wages. That has to be part of the package. That's mandated. So you really can't tell either way, because in either way, it's not proportional to what his wages are. All right, another proof. Tashema. Rabbi Elazar Chisma Omer lo yachal poel yoter al secharo. Hachamim matirim. Maila behaka mipelge. Demor sabar mishel hu ochel, or sabar mishel shamayim hu ochel. So Rabbi Elazar Chisma, he said that a worker is not allowed to eat more than his wages. Hachamim say it's permitted. So what's the essence of their argument? Perhaps it's Rabbi Elazar Chisma. He's the one that he would say that the worker is eating from his own wages, and therefore the amount extra that he can eat is limited to the amount of his wages. He's getting $100 for the day. Okay, so this is a bonus. Fine, a bonus that's coming to him as part of his package. His payment package, it makes sense that the bonus is going to be up to the amount of the wages, but not more. Whereas Chachamim, who say, yes, you can eat as much as you want, that's because it's a gift from heaven. And so, special thing, special gift, and it's not limited to the wages. So is that the answer? It's a machloket between these two opinions. La dekula ama mishelohu ochel. V'hacha bekinafshecha kami palge. Mor sabar kinafshecha bedabar shemoser nafsho alav. Umor sabar kinafshecha ma nafshecha im chasamta patur af poel im chasamta patur. No, it could be that everybody agrees that he's eating from his own property. This is part of the package of the wages that is coming to the worker. And the difference of opinion comes because of how to interpret this word, kenafshecha. When you come to someone's vineyard, you can eat grapes enough for your own pleasure, like as much as you want, kenafshecha. What is the application of that word, kenafshecha? Rabbi Elazar Chisma says, kenafshecha means something that you would devote your life to, even if you have to risk your life. Sometimes a worker, depending on what the job is, you might have to climb all the way up a tree to go and labor. You put in your sweat and toil because this is part of your livelihood. And so it's talking about, therefore, a worker, and this is part of his payment, that kenafshecha, he can eat as much as he wants for his kenafshecha means for his job. Okay, so that he interprets kenafshecha as that. So that's the reason why he can only eat as much until the amount of the wages. So that's what kenafshecha means, until the amount that you work for, up to that and no more. Whereas Chachamim say, no, the word kenafshecha, we use that for a different derasha altogether. It's a derasha that we already saw a couple of times, that the kenafshecha, we're reading it as applying both to the boss, his well-being, and the worker, and we're comparing the two to teach us that just like the owner, if he muzzles himself, and if the owner is technically allowed to eat from his own grain, as long as it's before it's finished processing, because then he has to take to the Ma'al Ma'aser. But if it's before that, he can eat from his own grain. But let's say he muzzles himself and he doesn't. Well, he's certainly allowed to, no problem of to the Ma'al Ma'aser, and no problem of stealing because it's his own. And so too, the worker, if they work out a deal and the owner says, listen, I'll give you $10 extra and don't eat anything, that's permitted to make such a deal, as long as the worker agrees. And that's what it means, kenafshecha. Just like if you would muzzle yourself, it's permitted. So too, if you muzzle your worker, not literally muzzle, but through a business deal, then that would be okay. So since Chachamim use the word kenafshecha for that derasha, something completely unrelated, therefore they don't have a limit on the amount. Because he can eat as much as he wants. It's not up to the amount of labor, like Rabbi Elazar Chasma said. Okay, so there is no proof from this source either. Tashema Nazir Shamar Tenu Lishtiu Banai En Sham In Lo V'Yamat Mishelo Ochel Amai En Sham In Lo. Let's say you have a Nazir. He's working in a vineyard. Okay, he's not allowed to eat grapes, so he says, "Listen, I'm working in the vineyard. I technically am entitled to eat grapes, but I'm a Nazir, so I can't eat them. So I want to shift my share and give it to my wife or my kids." If he says that, we don't listen to him. We don't demand that the owner do that. The owner does not have to give him anything at all. So this is a good proof. If you say that it belongs to him, it's his own wages, then why don't we listen to him? Why don't we say, yes, you're entitled to it. You can't eat it. Okay, give it to his wife. So that's a good proof that in fact it must be from Shamayim, and that's why he cannot regift it. And we say, no, that's not a good proof. Hatam mishum lech amrin nezira sechor lecharma la tikrav. Here, the reason that we don't allow him to give it to his wife or his kids is because we don't want a Nazir to be in the vineyard at all. We tell him, go away, Nazir, go around. Don't even come close to a vineyard. Don't even go through it for a shortcut. Don't be tempted. You tell someone who's has an alcoholic, you tell him, don't even come near the bar, right? Just in case that you might be tempted and drink something. So that's the reason we don't want him to be working there. So we're certainly not going to make it convenient for him by giving the grapes to his wife or his kids. And so that's really the reason. But if he was not a Nazir, then it could be that he would be able to re-gift it to his wife and kids. So there's no proof from here. Let's try another Braita, Tashema. Poel shama tenu lishti ubanai en sham'in lo. Here, this version of Braita is not talking about Nazir, it just says Poel, a regular worker. Sounds like any worker who says, I don't really want grapes, I'd rather give it to my wife and my kids. We do not let him. If you say it's his, why don't we listen to him? So it must be that it belongs to, it's a gift from Shamayim. And we answer, my poel nazir. Oh, when it says worker here, it's not talking about any worker. It's really talking only about nazir. Hold on. V'hatanya nazir, v'hatanya poel. Midi gabe hadadeh tanyan. Wait a second. Well, we already had a braita that says nazir, and here it says poel. So doesn't that mean that a poel is not a nazir, right? If it meant nazir, it would say nazir. Why would you have? If you have two braitot, we're assuming now that let's say they're taught in one collection. So if you have a nazir, then poel would be in contrast to a nazir, meaning not a nazir. So how could you say the poel means a nazir? And we answer, no. These two beraitot, were they taught together as a unit? They were not. These are two different beraitot from two different collections altogether. And so these are simply parallel and actually talking about the same thing, using slightly different language. But in fact, poel means a nazir, and the reason we say no is because we don't want a nazir working there at all. All right, now we have a third braita that's similar to the previous two. Tashema, minayin lepoel she'amar tenu lishti ubanai she'en sham'in lo, she'ne'emar ve'el kel yecha lo titen. V'chi te'ema hachina min nazir, yachi mishum el kel yecha lo titen, mishum lech amrin nazirahu. So now this braita says, how do you know that if a worker says, give the grapes to my wife and my kids, that we don't listen to him? Because the pasuk says that the worker can eat himself but cannot put into his own vessel, and giving it to his wife and kids is the same as him making a doggy bag to take home. He can eat it himself but not give it to anybody else, cannot take it home. That's the braita. Now if you say this is talking about a nazir, it can't be talking about a nazir because it gives a reason, and the reason applies to any worker, that you cannot put it in your own vessel. It shouldn't have said that reason. If it was talking about a nazir, it should have given the reason that we tell a nazir, go home, go away, we say to the nazir. So this seems like a really good proof that it is in fact from Shamayim, and no worker is allowed to give it to his wife or his kids. But still, the Gemara does not accept this. In hachina me'v'ayde tekatani la belshon poel kanasib la kera de poel. No, we can say even here it's talking about a nazir, and since it mentioned it uses the word laborer, even though it's really a nazir. But okay, we have to know it's talking about a nazir and not just any laborer. But since it used the language of a general laborer, so it brings up general pasuk that would apply to all laborers, even though Rashi says here it's just an asmachta, this pasuk. That's really not the reason. The reason really is because it's a nazir and we want the nazir to go away. All right, this is quite a difficult rejection of the proof. This looks really like a pretty good proof, and then you have to say, fine, poel means nazir. Fine, we accepted that in the previous one because, okay, it could be. So maybe the context of that braita was in the Masechet Nazir, collection of braitot about nazir. Could be. But here, you're saying because you used a general word, so then you're going to bring this pasuk, even though that's not really the pasuk. Okay, this really looks like a proof, but the Gemara wants to try its hardest. Possible, right? Maybe it could be referring to that. I think this is a good example of the Gemara's using all rhetorical persuasion to say, what's the best case we can make for this way and the best case we can make that way? And is it possible? Is this a possible reading? It's a possible reading. And this way, by rejecting that proof, we have an opportunity to bring more proofs. Okay, so here is the next one from a Mishnah in Masechet Ma'asrot Hashema. הסוחר את הפועל לכסות בתאנים, הרי זה אוכל ופטור מן המעשר, על מנת שאוכל אני ובני, או שיאכל בני בשכרי, הוא אוכל ופטור, ובנו אוכל וחייב. It says in this Mishnah that someone who hires a laborer to prepare figs for drying. You take the figs and you put them out so that they'll dry. So he can eat, and he doesn't have to take maaser because they're not finished processing yet. They're not out and dried yet. Okay, so that's a simple case. If the worker says, yes, I will work for you on condition that not only I could eat from the figs while I'm working, but also that my son can eat. Or if he says, on condition that my son will eat instead of me, I'm going to be working, and I want, from my wages, I want that to go to my son. So he can eat them, and the worker himself does not have to take maaser. But if his son eats, his son can eat. That was part of the deal. So okay, but he is obligated to take maaser from what he eats. If he has to take maaser first, and only then he can eat. Now, if you say that this is part of his wages, so just like the worker does not have to take maaser because it's not ready yet, it's not completed yet, so he should be able to give it to his son to eat as well. So rather, it must be that this is from Shamayim, and Shamayim says only the worker has granted the right to eat it as part of the deal. That's a special gift to him. But if he gives it over to his son, then it's kind of like the son is purchasing it. Therefore, a purchaser, the act of purchasing makes it completed. Is the same. It triggers maaser. It's the same as as completing it. And so it must be that this is really from Shamayim and it belongs only to him, and therefore transferring it is the same as saying, you know what, part of my wages I transfer to him. So it's really like the worker is saying, here, I'll give you some of my wages, and instead, give the figs to him. So it is a purchase, and that would explain why he has to take maaser. So this would seem to be a proof that it's from Shamayim. But we reject this. Amar Ravina mishum demehazek mikach. Ravina says, no, really, it does belong to the worker, and the worker can give it to his son, and should not, from the letter of the law, have to take maaser. But since it looks like a sale, from the outsider may not know the details and sees that someone else is eating it, the son is eating it, well, it must be he bought it, but he didn't take maaser. So because it's too similar to that, that's the reason. So this is not necessarily a proof. Tashema hasochet et hapoel lasot benet harevai shelo hare elu lo yochelu ve'im lo hodiam podeh u'ma'achil. This is from a Mishnah coming on the next daf, that a worker, someone who hires a worker to work on his trees that are in the 4th year. Now, the first 3 years is olah. No one's allowed to eat that. Produce in the 4th year of a tree, the owner can eat in Yerushalayim, like Maaser Sheni. But the worker, let's assume that they're not working in Yerushalayim, the worker is not allowed to eat there in the orchard of the owner. Now, so in that case, the worker cannot eat. However, that's only if the owner told the worker beforehand, this is netat havai, so you should know, right? It's going to be $100 for the day, and you're not going to be allowed to eat because it's prohibited as netat havai. That's if he told them. Good. But if he didn't tell them when he hired them, then the owner has to go and redeem fruit, just like Maaser Sheni, you can redeem for money and then take the money and eat it in Jerusalem. You add a 5th. So too you could do the same thing for netat havai. So if you didn't tell him up front that you won't be able to eat because netat havai, then the worker is expecting that in addition to the $100, he'll also be able to eat from the fruit that he is working on. And so then, therefore, since he didn't tell him, the owner has to redeem and allow the worker to eat. Now, v'i amat mishel shamayim huachel, amai podeh u'machilan, isura la zachi lehu rachamana. So if it's a gift from heaven, then why is the owner responsible to redeem and give and pay him? This is a gift from heaven, and you think that from heaven they're going to give him a gift that's prohibited? This is all part of the system of the Torah. Torah says that Hashem gives you a special gift if you're a worker. Hashem also says that netat havai is not allowed. So that's it. You're not allowed. It's not the worker. It's not the owner's financial responsibility to make up for it. It's not his problem. Therefore, this seems to be a proof that it's a financial agreement and the financial burden on the boss to give this to the worker, and it belongs to the worker financially, not a gift from heaven. Isn't that a good proof? And we say no. Hatam mishum demechazek mikach ta'ut. No, here, even though from the letter of the law, the owner does not have to provide for him because it's a gift from heaven. But it looks like a mistaken transaction because usually people assume that if I come to work on your field, I'll be able to eat from it also. And you didn't tell me that this was netarevai, so I can't complain because it's a gift from heaven, but it kind of looks like a mistaken transaction. And so in order to pacify everybody, that won't even look like the owner's cheating him. So we say, you know what, owner, redeem some fruit and give it to him. But it's not necessarily required from the letter of the law, and therefore is not a proof. Ema sefa. Let's try to bring a proof from the continuation of that Mishnah. Nit paresu igulav, nit patechu chaviotav, hare elu lo yochelu, ve'im lo hodian, me'aser u'ma'achilan. V'yamat mishel shamayim hu'achel, amay me'aser u'ma'achilan, isura la zache lehu rachamana. If someone had figs, and they would make these figs into cakes, and make these dried fig cakes. Now, he puts them in there to dry out nicely, but it broke apart, and now he has to hire people to do it again. The significance of that is it's already completed, so it's now chayav in ma'aser. So a worker who now has to do it the second time, the worker who did it the first time was allowed to eat while he was working because it's not yet completed till it's done. But now that it was done, so now it's chayav in ma'aser. It broke apart. A worker has to come do it the second time, but this worker who does it a second time will not be able to eat. Or similarly, if you have wine and you put it into barrels, so that's it. Now that wine is chayav in ma'aser. Now the barrels opened up. So you need workers that will refill it. They spill it into a pit, and now they have to refill the barrels. So since it's already been completed, and now it's chayav maaser, the workers cannot eat from it. So that's the law. However, that's only if the owner told them beforehand, listen, this stuff is already chayav maaser, you won't be able to eat it. You agreed to come in and work? They say, okay, then they cannot eat from it. However, if he didn't tell them, then he has to take maaser from it, so that now it will be permitted to eat, and allow them to eat from the figs or from the wine. That's the continuation of the Mishnah. Now, same proof. If you say that it belongs to Shamayim, then why does the owner have to provide anything for them? Right? From heaven gave you this gift, usually when you're a worker, and from heaven the law is that now it's not maaser and you're not allowed to eat it. It's not a financial obligation of the owner. And the Torah does not grant this to you. So why should the owner have to do anything if it's not his financial obligation? And maybe you'll give the same answer here as we did for the Resha, that because it looks like a mekach ta'ut, because usually the worker can eat from it and he's going to feel that kind of complaint, and so therefore to make peace, we're going to require the owner to provide for them, even though from the letter of the law they don't. He doesn't have to, and therefore it's not a proof. Fine, I can accept that in the case of figs, because it does in fact look like a mistaken transaction. Because when the worker comes and he sees the figs, he doesn't know that they were already packed once before. Now he just sees figs all over that have to be packed up, and so there's no way for him to know that this was that they were already packed up. And so he's coming assuming that he'll be able to eat the figs, and now he can't. He feels bad about it. He wouldn't have agreed to it had he known. So that's why we ask the owner to make good on the case. Ela nitpatechu chaviotav mai mikach taut ika medayada diitbil lehu lemaaser. But in the case where the barrels opened up and they have to put the wine back into the barrels, what possibility of a mekach ta'ut would there be? They know, the workers will know that it's tebel, because regarding wine, it's already chayav in maaser when it goes into the pit in the first place, even before it's packed into barrels. So they should know know, they would know on their own that it is tebel and it's required, maaser is required at this point, and that this maaser is not coming to them. So therefore there's no possibility of mekach ta'ut, and yet you say that the owner has to take maaser and pay them. That means that it's the owner's obligation, not a gift from heaven. So isn't that a good proof? Amar Rav Shesha, chaviotav labor. V'atanya, yain mishiyad labor. We go through this again. Rav Shesha says, when the barrels opened up, not into another container, but rather into the original pit from which it came. But we say, no, that's not a good answer, because that's the very point that wine, once they step on it, it goes down and goes into a pit. It's already liable to maaser at that point, so therefore the workers should know. So this seems like a good proof, but we reject the proof. Ke Rabbi Akiva damar mesheyikape damar damrule lahava yadinan. We could be following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that one does not have to take maaser until not only the wine goes into the pit, but the waste would then float up after a little while, and then you remove that top layer of waste. Only then, that's considered the finishing of the processing, and only then is it liable. And the workers can say, we didn't know that was already done, that the waste was already taken. We thought that we're going to do that, take away the waste, and we will be able to drink the wine while we are working, and therefore it does look like a mekach ta'ut. That's why the owner has to provide for them. Now, what if you ask that the owner can say to the workers, you should have known that maybe the waste was already taken off, and then why were you assuming that it wasn't, and that you have this money coming to you that you can drink from it, right? Why didn't you think that maybe it was already done, that you cannot eat anything, that you're going to call it a mekach ta'ut, or it looks like mekach ta'ut? And the answer is, we're talking about a place where the person who draws out the wine is also the person who takes away the waste that's floating on top. That normally it's the same worker that does both. So since the owner said, come and draw out the wine, siphon out the wine and put it in the barrels, they assumed that they would be also cleaning the waste off of it, and therefore they would be able to drink it. And so, even though it could be this is a gift from heaven, but since it's like a mekach ta'ut, there's a possibility of them feeling like it's a mekach ta'ut, so that's why the owner has to provide for them. Good. V'hashtad etaneh Rav Zevid bedebe Rabbi Hoshaya yayin mishired labor v'yikapeh v'Rabbi Akiva omer mi sheyishle b'chaviot afilu tema shelo nitpatechu chaviyotav labor damrule lahavayad inan demashle. Now, we were constructing this case based on what the Mishnah above said, where the barrels broke. But we can construct actually a similar case even if the barrels didn't break, because now Rav Zevid came and he taught us a baraita from the school of Rabbi Hoshaya. We didn't know this baraita before, but now that we know this baraita, we can have another case that's the same, equivalent to the first one. The baraita says that wine, once it goes down into the pit, and the top layer of waste is cleaned away, then it's chayav maaser. That's the opinion of Tanakh Kama. Rabbi Akiva disagrees, and he pushes it off later and says it's not until it's in the barrel and you clean the waste, clean the waste again once it's in the barrel. It's not until that point that you have to take a maaser. So, since now that we know this, we can even say that it's not talking about a case where it was put into the barrels and the barrels broke and it went back into the pit, even if it's in the barrels, and still the workers can say, we didn't know that the waste was drained already from the barrels. We thought, okay, it's in the barrels, but we're going to be the ones to drain the waste. So therefore we came to work assuming that we would be able to drink, and now that you're telling us we can't, so then we feel like it's a mekach ta'ut, and that's why the owner has to provide for them. And if you ask, well, why can't we say to the workers, you should have figured that maybe the waste was already drained from the barrels and therefore you would not be able to drink. Why did you assume that you would be able to drink from them? And the answer again is we're talking about a place where it's customary that the person who's hired to plug the barrels, to finish the whole process, also does the draining. And so when they were hired to plug up the barrels, they assumed that it wasn't drained yet and they would be able to drink, and therefore when they show up and say, oh, it was already drained, this is what, usually we can do it. Now you're telling us we can't drink from it. So in that case, we tell the owner that he should take maaser and provide for them. And so again here, there's no proof. It could be that it's from Shamayim. It could be that it's the owner's obligation, and that's why he has to give it, no matter what. But it could be that it's from Shamayim. However, even though it's from Shamayim, still, since they feel like it was a mekach ta'ut, so not from the letter of the law, but from beyond the letter of the law, we ask the owner to provide something for them. Tashema, one more attempted proof. Koses Adam al yedei asmo, al yedei beno ubito hagedolim, al yedei abdo b'shifchato hagedolim, v'al yedei ishto mipnei sheyesh bahen da'at, aval eno koses lo al yedei beno ubito haketanim, velo al yedei abdo b'shifchato haketanim, velo al yedei behemto mipnei she'en bahem da'at. This is a Mishnah coming up soon that teaches that someone can make a stipulation with his boss. He's a worker, and he could say, listen, I don't want to eat the produce while I'm working. Instead, I want some extra money. Instead of paying me $100 for the day, pay me $110, and I won't work. That's the stipulation. He can do that for himself if he's the worker, and someone can also make the same stipulation for his son or daughter who are adults, or for his servant or maidservant who are adults, or for his wife, because all those people have da'at, they have minds of their own, and they understand that they're giving over this right, that their father, husband, or master is relinquishing this right on their behalf. So that works. However, someone cannot do so for his son or his daughter who are minors, or for his servant or maidservant who are minors, and certainly not for his animal, because they do not have mental competence and they will not understand that they are giving over a right that belongs to them. Now that's the Mishnah. Let's assume right now that we're talking about a case where the father, husband, master is providing for all of these people, and since he's providing them with sustenance, whenever they work, he gets their wages. So since he's in charge of their wages, so then that's why he is making this deal on their behalf. He would rather get more of the wages himself, and that way they will not eat, while the adult people here will not eat. So that's generally the deal. If someone is providing sustenance, then they deserve the wages of the work that person does. Iamat bishlama mishel shamayim hu ochel mishum hachi eno koses. Ela iamat mishelohu ochel ketanim name nikos lehu. Now here's the attempted proof. We understand if this the produce that the worker eats is a gift from heaven, then it would make sense why to explain why the father cannot do this for his minor children, because this is a gift from heaven that's given to them, and they don't have da'at to give it away, and therefore there's nothing he can do to take it away from them. Whereas the adults, they understand, okay, it's a gift from heaven, and we're willing to relinquish it. But if you say that this is a financial obligation of the boss, so then the father should also be, or master, should also be able to make a stipulation for minors, because just like he's negotiating the wages, this is actually just another way of talking about wages. The wages are $100 plus lunch. Okay, don't give them lunch, don't let them eat while they're working, and give them $110. So the father, just like he can negotiate wages, should be able to negotiate whether they can eat or not. So isn't that a good proof that the ability of the worker to eat is a gift from heaven? And we answer, no. No, we're talking about a case where the father is not providing sustenance to the kids. Therefore the father doesn't have the right to the wages any more than the child himself does. And that's why the father cannot give away the wages of the child either. So that's why it doesn't matter, even if you say it's a financial obligation of the boss to the child, that's why the father has no ability to do that. Well, if so, then also for adults, since the father is not providing sustenance to the adults, so that's their own wages. So what right does the father-husband have to give away the wages of the adults? So we answer, the adults, they understand, and they will relinquish their rights. The adults, as long as they know, listen, this is my wages, I'm keeping them, but I don't want to negotiate my own contract. I want my husband to negotiate, or my father to negotiate my contract with me. Whatever he says, I'll do. So then that's fine. The adult can do whatever he wants. But a child that does not have the knowledge to relinquish his rights, and that's why it doesn't work in that case. And so there's no proof from here whether it's a gift from heaven or it's wages that the boss has to give. Now we have an alternate baraita that's an alternate halacha from the Mishnah. The difference between them is only going to be in the one case of a minor servant. But let's read the whole thing. Koses adam al yedei asmo al yedei ishto aval lo al yedei behemto. Al yedei beno b'toch gedolim aval lo al yedei beno b'toch ketanim. Vekoses al yedei abdo v'shifchato kena'anim ben gedolim uben ketanim. This just has almost all the same information, but in a different order. A person can make the stipulation, as we said before, for himself or for his wife, but not for his animal. He can also stipulate for his children that are adults, but not for his children that are minors. And he can make a stipulation for his servant and maidservant, whether they are adults or children. So this is all in agreement, except for the minor maidservant, according to the Mishnah. The master cannot give away the rights for his minor slave. However, according to this baraita, the master can give away the rights to eat fruit of his minor slave. My love, so let's assume, for the sake of argument right now, that we're talking about a case where the master is providing sustenance to the slave. And the Baraita and the Mishnah are arguing on the following point, that the Baraita is assuming that the right to eat fruit is something that the owner of the field has to give, and therefore the father can negotiate the wages for his minor slave. He's providing for the minor slave, and therefore he owns their wages, and the eating of the fruit is part of the wages, and that's why he's allowed to negotiate for the minor. Whereas the Mishnah thinks that the gifts are from heaven, and therefore, since it's from heaven, the father, the master, has no right to negotiate on behalf of the minor slave, because the minor slave doesn't have da'at to know that he's giving it away, and so the master cannot give it away, and that's the opinion of the Mishnah. So this would answer our original question. It's a machloket between the Mishnah and the Baraita, right? Lo dekula alma mishelohu ochel v'la kashya kan b'sheno ma'aleh lahen mezonot u'baraita b'ma'aleh lahen mezonot. No, it could be in fact that both the Baraita and the Mishnah agree that the right to eat the produce is something that the boss is financially obligated to do, and therefore the worker is eating from his own. And nevertheless, we can explain the difference between the two sources. That the Mishnah is talking about a case where the master is not providing food for the servant, and therefore the servant is going to keep their own work. And that's why the master cannot stipulate on behalf of the minor. Whereas according to the Baraita, that's where the master is providing food for everybody on the list, including the servant, and therefore the master has the right to the wages, and that's why the master can negotiate on behalf even of the a minor child. Okay, b'mai okimta, b'mai lehen mezonot. Now, how did we interpret the baraita in the case that we said that's a case where he is providing for them, and therefore he has a right over the minors too. And if so, then even for his minor children, since he's providing for them, so he owns their wages, he should be able to make a stipulation. But the Baraita says not minor children. And the answer is no, in that case is different, because to make his sons and daughters suffer that they're going to be working and not be able to eat, that the Torah does not give a father a right to do. It does give that right to a master to make a minor servant do, but not to children. And therefore, even though he's providing for them and he owns their wages and he can negotiate their wages, nevertheless, it's just not right to make his children suffer psychologically, because they don't really know what's going on, and now they can't eat while they're working. So that's just not, the father can't do that. B'mai okimta lematnitin. Now the Mishnah, how did we, what presumption did we have when we interpreted that? B'she'en ma'aleh lahen mezonot. We interpret that to be a case where the father is not providing, or the master is not providing for the people, and that's why he does not have a right over the minors to relinquish their rights, because he cannot keep their wages, because he's not providing for them. Okay, so then that explanation makes sense according to the opinion that says a master does not have a right to tell a servant, work for me and I am not paying you. Then this makes sense. In other words, according to this opinion, a master has to provide sustenance to his slave unless they say, listen, you keep your wages and I won't sustain you. The same deal that husband has with his wife, for example. So in that case, as long as you assume that our Mishnah is where the master is not providing for the minor servant, and that would mean that the minor servant keeps their own wages, that would explain why the master cannot make a stipulation on behalf of the minor, because he gets to keep his own wages. Fine, so that all makes sense, as we already said. But there is another opinion that says that a master can tell a servant, I want you to work for me and I have no obligation to sustain you. We're talking about Eved Kanani, and this opinion says that a master does not have a legal obligation to feed his servant. Now, it's a good idea for a master to feed his servant, otherwise it will die, and this will not be a good financial investment for the master, besides being cruel and all that. But technically, the master does not have to. He can say, right, I want you to work for me, I get everything, and you, well, how are you going to eat? I don't know, go and beg, it's not my problem. And so since the master technically does not have to feed his slave and can get the slave's wages no matter what, that means in all cases a master has a right to his Eved Kanani, to his wages, even whether an adult or a minor. And therefore, the master should always be able to make a stipulation and say, you can't eat while you're working because I want to get all the wages. So then how can we explain the Mishnah that says that a master cannot stipulate for a minor slave? What are you going to say? Ma'ika lememar. Ela idi ve'idi b'shen ma'ale lahen mezonot. Ubeha pelige demor sabar yachol umor sabar en yachol. Rather, both the Mishnah and the Baraita are talking about cases where the master is not providing sustenance for the slave. And to explain the different conclusions in each, the different rulings in each, we can say as follows, that the author of the Baraita thinks that a master can say, listen, you have to work for me and I'm not feeding you. Even though I'm not feeding you, nevertheless, I get your wages. Since the master owns the slave's wages, he has a right to negotiate them even for a minor slave and say, I'm getting more wages, and slave, you cannot eat anything. Whereas the author of the Mishnah says, no, if the master is not providing sustenance to the slave, then he cannot take the wages of the slave. and therefore the slave keeps his own wages, and when it's a minor slave, since this is he can keep his own wages, and this is part of the wages, the master cannot negotiate them away. Okay, so now we understand the difference between them. Here's the problem. Rabbi Yochanan, we know from elsewhere, thinks that a master can make this deal with his slave and say and tell him, work for me and I'm not feeding you, that the wages belong to the master no matter what. So that would mean that Rabbi Yochanan is following the opinion of the Baraita against the Mishnah. That doesn't make sense. Rabbi Yochanan always follows the Mishnah against a Baraita. So this explanation is not satisfactory. Ela tekula alma mishel shamayim hu ochel vela maseh kasitz umay kosetz damar Rabbi Hoshaya mizonot. Rather, it must be that everybody agrees. We finally have a conclusion to our original question. The right for a worker to eat is a gift from heaven. Therefore, the master owner the master does not have the ability to make a stipulation for a minor child or a minor slave to give away that right that is a God-given right, literally a God-given right to him. And so that now we understand the Mishnah makes perfect sense, because the Mishnah says that a father or master cannot give away a right of a minor. Now, what about the Baraita? So the word kosetz in the Baraita does not mean what we thought it meant. It has a different meaning than it does in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, it means that he can make a deal and say, listen, give me the wages, extra $10 in wages, and he's not going to eat. The father cannot do that. And even in the Baraita, he cannot do that. The word kosetz in the Baraita, where it says that the father can do this for a minor slave, that's talking about pre-feeding the slave. They can make a deal that the master says, I will feed the slave a lot of food before he comes and starts working for you, and that way he won't eat a lot of grapes while he is working. That's what a person is allowed to do for his slave. Maybe not for his child, because as we said before, he can't make his child suffer in that way. That's what it's talking about. But this doesn't answer all the questions either, because if so, regarding an animal, there also should be permitted for them to make such a deal. Right? We saw this case earlier, that a person can say, I'll feed my animal beforehand a lot. That way he won't eat too much when it comes to you. So that should be permitted. Yet the Mishnah and Baraita said that in those cases, the Baraita says it's prohibited. So if the word to stipulate is talking about this type of stipulation, why would the Baraita say it's prohibited? Rather, the final answer to our question is that it's a machloket between the Baraita and the Mishnah. The Baraita thinks that it's the worker's own financial right from the boss to eat the produce while he's working, and the boss has to provide it for him. And therefore, the master of a minor slave has a right to negotiate wages for his servant, even a minor servant, and can tell the servant, sorry, you're not going to be able to eat, and he can get paid more money. That's okay. Whereas the Mishnah thinks that this is a gift from heaven, and therefore, since it's a gift from heaven, the master has no right to relinquish, not even though it's a slave's right to eat while he's working, even Eved Kanani, who's a minor, and the minor does not have mental capacity to give away that right, and therefore the master, that's the Mishnah's opinion, does not have a right to give away the minor's ability to eat while he is working. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.